When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will this be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Jesus answered them, "Beware that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Messiah,' and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of many wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nations will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All this is but the beginning of the birth pangs."
So this is the part of the basis of eschatology, which is the study of the end times and what's going to happen in the
Eschatology.
Yes.
Yeah.
And well, it's interesting because we have a lot of things here about. There's this idea, first of all, that a lot of the early disciples and followers of Jesus believed that this would happen in their lifetime.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because he does say at the end there, "You will not pass away." But of course, up until now, we have been talking about this idea of death being strange because the afterlife is one of the living. Right? So if we read it in context, that line there is not as straightforward as it seems. It does not seem to just be saying, "You will not die before this happens," in my opinion anyway. There are disagreements on this, of course. But it seems to me like what we've been talking about so far has been about reconceptualizing and reprioritizing, and him thinking differently about the afterlife and how the afterlife is still alive. Right? So when he says that they're not going to pass away, there is this sort of underlying idea here. Well, what does that mean? Because there is this idea that we're still going to be alive, right? So that's one thing. And also, he begins by saying there's going to be lots of wars and lots of false prophets. Nations will be rising and falling. I don't see how that can happen in their lifetime, right? I mean, that seems like a lot of events that are supposed to happen. So that's some signs there that I don't think this is some sort of false saying. Like, I don't think because some people directly just say, "Well, okay, clearly this is false." Like he's saying this is all gonna occur. It didn't occur, but I don't think that's so straightforward.
You think he's
In terms of
talking
reading
about it more in the sense of like, this is going to happen.
later, right?
This is going to happen throughout history
Exactly. Well, yeah, history since his death.
since his death.
Um,
That's the way I've always seen it too.
there is a lot of different theories on it, but that's to me it seems like that just follows from the way we've read it so far. But there's of course people who can.
But then how do you make sense
disagree.
of coming back on the third day?
What do you mean?
Well, isn't it all supposed to just
Oh, that refers to the resurrection, you mean?
yeah.
Yeah, so that would be another way of reading it. So that's why I'm saying there's like different ways of reading it, and technically they're not well, I would say still though, we're talking about here when he talks about the rise and fall of the nations. Obviously that doesn't happen by the time he is resurrected. So you could read it as him saying, as him changing here from two different things. First talking about the end times, and then he like shifts to talking about when he's going to come in his glory, which would be the resurrection, and that would happen in their lifetime. So that could also be another reading you can do, yeah.
Or do you think it could also be where we're talking about the death and resurrection, but then we're also talking about the period from the resurrection to the second coming?
Right. So that's what I'm saying. It's and also that is not there's another way we could look at it is also that is a repeating thing. So we have like a microcosm and then we have the macrocosm. So the microcosm would be what's going to happen with them, which is things are going to get really bad, which is
Right.
about to happen, right, in the story, and then he's going to come in all his glory. And then that could also be expanded to the macrocosm, which would be the end of our history, right? So it's not just the end of their story, but it's the end of our story.
Right.
So, yes, exactly. So I think maybe the ambiguity is meant to be because the meaning is two-layered, right? So it's meant to be you're reading it for them, but you're also reading it for yourself.
Yeah.
Because he does, again, he talks about like the word, my words will never pass away, right? So there's these things where he's referring obviously to events after his death and resurrection, but also it seems to be foreshadowing his death and resurrection, right?
And I think the foreshadowing is kind of highlighted in this lesson from the fig tree passage where he says, the fig tree learned its lessons. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, foreshadowing that summer is near. So also when you see all these things, you know that here he is near at the very gates. So again, same way that the fig tree foreshadows summer is coming. These things happen. These things happening foreshadow. Or were you talking about him foreshadowing that these events will occur in the future?
Yes, I think that's part of it as well. But again, I said it's interesting because you can read it in both ways, right? Because he talks about things will become worse, and he says that it will become worse, but not only in terms of like the suffering and the circumstances, but also in terms of that it will be a direct threat to people's salvation, right? And now that's a bit peculiar because you might be thinking, well, salvation is dependent on your personal choice, right? So what circumstances would threaten that? But obviously we know that there's a lot of circumstances in the world that can threaten your personal choices because when you're pushed, a lot of people will change their mind, right? Because that's again that strange thing about human freedom where it's like, well, we know we can change it, so why should you stay the same, right? So if you're getting pushed on something, it's a lot easier, I think, a human tendency actually to just decide to choose the opposite, right? And that's why he says the time will be cut short so that not everybody leaves, right? Because it seems like the human nature just is to change their to not stay, to not sustain their belief, right?
Yeah.
So you could read that as the moment before the resurrection, where the disciples have this moment of like, do they stick up with Jesus, like we'll see with Peter, or do they not? Or you could read this as the second coming and what's going to happen then, and then the final age of people, will they stick with Jesus or not, right?
Yeah. For sure. The coming of the Son of Man. Immediately after the suffering of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, and he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. The lesson of the fig tree. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So, also when you see all these things, you know that he is near, at the very gates. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away.
Okay.